let's go back in time a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about Cuba.
The anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis is coming up next month.
50th anniversary.
Correct.
And I was in Cuba recently, in the spring, and you still feel, obviously, there's a lot of tension still between the governments. Can you tell your own experience of, I don't know if you worked on the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yes, I wrote a book called The Limits of Safety, which had 2 chapters that analyzed problems that had occurred that had very few of which had been known before I had done this book. We jerry-rigged some missiles out in Montana to add to our deterrent strength, but did so in a way that inadvertently gave individual operators the ability, physical ability, not the authority, the physical ability to launch a 10 nuclear missiles on their own, which is against the rules, and it was not supposed to have been done, but it was done. I discovered that in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, received a message suggesting that the missiles had just been launched from Cuba, and one was about to detonate in Tampa, Florida. It turns out, in the end, that there had been no missile launched, and that a test tape had been put into one of the online radar systems, and the operator got confused about what was a test tape and what was real, and reported a simulation as being real. And what was frightening about this and other kinds of incidents was not just that they occurred, but they got covered up afterwards. So that senior authorities in the Pentagon, much less the American public, didn't really learn about some of the close calls to accidents that occurred. So on the 40th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was asked to attend and participate in a special meeting of the American government officials who were still survivors 40 years later, and Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and a number of the other the revolutionaries who were in charge in Cuba, in Havana on the 40th anniversary.
So this is
2002. My role was to help keep people honest, saying, this is what we know about what happened, and then I was asked to give a short talk on these particular events. The 2 most memorable for me parts of the trip. First was a very embarrassing moment with Fidel Castro, because he had a reception line after the first day's session. And as we went through, he shook my hand and asked me through his interpreter whether I was related to Carl Sagan. And without thinking about it, I gave my normal smart aleck response that I give when people ask that. And I said, no, but I've been asked that question billions and billions of times. He did not get the joke, because he had never seen Carl Sagan say billions and billions of stars.
Because they don't get that channel.
Yeah, that's not available in Spanish in Cuba in the 1980s. So he said to me through his translator, "I'm sorry if I asked you a stupid question." And I realized, I've just insulted a communist dictator in his country. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done. So I immediately said, no, I was just making a silly joke, because Dr. Sagan used to say billions and billions of stars, but I do want to talk to you about the non-proliferation treaty and why Cuba should ratify it. It's good that you signed it, but you should really ratify it. And he immediately understood what had happened and said, let's talk about the NPT, the non-proliferation treaty. So we had a good conversation about that. The other most memorable part about this conference was what happened right at the very end of it. I had given my talk, and many others had given talks on different parts of their research or their experiences for the participants. And Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during the Cuban Missile Crisis and during the war in Vietnam, somebody who I think deserves considerable credit for getting us out of the Cuban Missile Crisis without there being a war, but also deserves a lot of the credit for the tragedy of Vietnam. And he knows that, or knew that,
yes,
and recognized that, as we know from the film. At the end of the conference, he talked about things going wrong and had cited my talk and other things that had gone wrong and how close they were. And he said, things go wrong when you get engaged in war. Things escalate, and just look at what's going on in Afghanistan. We accidentally bombed an American, or the Americans accidentally bombed a Afghan wedding party and killed innocent people. And one of the American former officials stood up and said, Mr. Secretary, Secretary of Defense, even one who's retired, should never, ever insult the American military. And he walked out of the room.
Whoa.
And McNamara just looked ashen. And he said farewell to the group. He said he had to leave early, and Castro stood up. Castro said, Mr. Secretary, I hope that you will come back 10 years from now, 2012, and we'll have the final documents available, and we'll have another anniversary for the 50th anniversary. And McNamara said, in 2012, I will not be in Havana. I will be in hell. And he walked out of the room.
Whoa.
Right. And so, McNamara's been dead for a couple of years now. I don't know whether he's in heaven or hell or where he is.
But he won't be in Havana.
But he won't be in Havana, and it just showed, his own personal views about his own complicity in what were really poor decisions.